Hi guys, welcome again. In our previous tutorial we have shown you how to get the maximum and the minimum values of the various kinds of primitive data type. We also discussed their various relationship. In this tutorial we will show you how to declare a primitive data type and pass on set of values among the various primitive data type. So welcome and let's get started. So the first thing we say int, and we say int data equal, and we pass on set of values, right, for the integer data, and we put our semicolon. So we also come, we say long, and we say long data, and we pass on set of value for the long. You can pass random value, it's not something fixed. And you also come next, you say float, and we try to pass on value for the float. We say float data, and we pass on set of value, let's say 6.8. we come next, we also say our double, and we say double data, and we pass on set of value for the double. So here we go. Good. So we pass like 4 set of various data type, and like with the values assigned to them, and we have errors for that of the float. So at first we will discuss the integer and that of the long. So here we have the integer and we have the long. In Java programming language, it's very important that you follow the syntax, because sometimes we have these challenges, like sometimes we pass on set of values and what we expect we are not getting the output. So sometimes it's syntax error. It's good to follow the syntax. What happening here is that the Java program does not know whether this is a long data type. Rather, it knows that this is a integer data type. It falls in the integer syntax. So it's always better that when you're trying to declare a long data type, you try to identify it by the categories it belongs. So likewise, if you want to distinguish this, like tell the compiler or the Java programming language that this is for long, this value is assigned to the long, this is for the int, which is good, but this is not for int, it's for long. What you do is that you just put an L behind it, and you see now it falls in the long categories, which is very good to follow at times. Is very good to follow the syntax. And likewise, again, we come to the float data type. Almost the same thing apply. It's good to follow the syntax. So here now we having errors, like, but at most cases maybe sometimes you won't have like errors. Like it will be as normal like this double data type, but like the compiler does not know if this is a float data type or this is a double data type. So it's always good to identify it by like the categories of data. So it's good that you put the identifications. So for the float you also put F, and you don't have any more error, right? So now the compiler knows that this is for the float data type, it belongs to the float data type, and this belongs to the double data type. So which is very good. But for the double, you can also like use D. Since you have some set of data that you want to pass it as the double data type, and you have some set of float values, you also pass like ready D and to identify it. In some cases it's good to do it, but at most cases like people don't just like do it. But it's also good to understand like for the syntax of the Java programming language. So if I take like this D from there and put any other like characters, like I have error because it does not belong, it's not a syntax format. But if you put a D, and you won't have error. You see, it also applied for the others. So if you take the L from here and you try to put something else, you will have error because this is not for the syntax, and except you pull the L, which for long, and you don't have error. That's one thing. But let's try to print this data. So we say salt, and we try to print this, like say long data. So we try to like print this line four of these. Good. And we just say float, and we say double, let's say int Good. So it does not really matter the positions of it. And let's say long data. We also come next, we append it, we say float, and we call the float data. Good. We come next, we say double, we call the double data, and we come next, we also say int, which was the first. Okay, good. So we can try to test this, and we try to print it off, and we see what we have. Here we go. Okay, so you see we try to print it out. The first one, we got a long, and we got the float data, we got a double data, and we got the integer data. So in the syntax here, we have like identifications between the various data. For the long data, we put L, and for the float, we put F, and for the D, we put like D behind it. So but here from the result, we don't have the letters behind the data, because like we were following the syntax format. So if you try to put the letters behind the various data just to identify it, eventually if you print it out, you won't have like the letters behind the data as the result. It's just to follow a syntax format, which is very important to follow the syntax format within the Java programming language. So otherwise, if you don't want to do this, like you don't want to like put the various letters behind it, you can also try to apply casting. You can cast the various data, and to apply the casting, what you do is you try to do this one. So let's come here and we say, let's write some differences here with a statement. We say casting. Let's say casting applied, and we see what happens. Good. Then we come here and we say int. Let's use int first. We say int, and we say int data type. Yeah. So we say int data type, and we say int equal. We say equal, and likewise we pass the set of value for the int, which we don't have error because we don't need to put identifications behind the int data, like to put I. No, it's always like in the Java syntax format. But for the others, so we come here, we say long, and we say long data type is equal. And since that we don't want to use this L behind this data, we can also cast it. We come here and we say first let's pass the long data. So we pass the long data, and we put this. So here it is in the integer format, like we said previously. So we don't want it being in the integer format, and we also don't want to put the L behind this to identify as a long, but rather we want to cast it, and it will also be identified as a long, but we are using different syntax. So what you do is you come here and you cast it here by doing this. You say long, and now you don't have error anymore because you have cast the data type, right? So this is how to apply the casting within the Java programming language, and it does not only work for the long, it works for the other data types. So we can also come here again, we apply it for the float data. Let's say float, and we say float data. So we say float data type, or I think it's better that way. So we say equal, and we try to cast it. So it's basically the same things, the same logic applied. We say float. Good. Then we can pass our float data. So let's say 5.25, and we don't need to put the L behind it. So if we try to print this guy, we will get the same thing. So let's say float, and we try to call the float data type. Very good. And we also apply the same thing for the the long data type. So we try to call the long data type value. So okay, this one it was pretty fast, so we have some errors. So let's try to copy this line and do it faster. Good. So we say long, this is for the long data, and we try to call the long data. We say long data type. Good. Here we go. So if we try to print this guide, we will have exactly what belongs to the long and what belongs to the float data type. So let's see if I'm right or I'm wrong. So let's try to do the test case. All right, very good. So it's running now, and let's see what happened. Here we go. So this is the result. Like now we don't have any more errors, you can see, for the float data and for the long data. So just in case that you don't want to pull the various abbreviations behind it, like using like long or like F, using for the float using F and for the long using L, like we applied here, you don't want to do it, you can also use like the casting syntax, which is good to use within the Java programming language, and is very good. Now the last thing I want to show you is that sometimes it's very good when you are trying to declare the various data type following the syntax. So here we notice that the integer data type falls in 2 billions, and anything above 2 billions is above the maximum level of the integer data type, which will result to an error. And if you want to prove that, I discussed it in our previous tutorial, but we can try it here. We try to pass some set of integer value. So we say int, and we say test int equal, and we try to pass some set of values, right? And we put our semicolon. So now we have error because what we did is against the syntax format of the Java programming language. Many times we try to pass on long set of strings or some set of values, numbers, and we expect to get a positive result. Sometimes we are going against the syntax format of the programming language, and in Java programming language is very important because Java is a case sensitive programming language, and the syntax is also important to follow. So if you have these kind of situations wherein you want to pass a set of numbers, and because you have this syntax format error, it's good to like have the next alternative wherein you can use another data type, which is the long data type. So int and the long almost they have the same relationship. So here the long data type, let's say test long, and we try to copy this value. Let's try to copy the same value and try to pass it for the long data type. We come here and we try to copy this value for the long and see what happens. So let's come here and we copy. Good. So for the long, we still have error because like it's not fully identified. So when we have these situations, all we need to do is to use the casting method for the long. Either we put the L behind it and we don't have error, you see. So when we put the L behind the long, we don't have error. So we can use that alternative to pass that long set of strings for the long, then to pass it for the integer, because the long falls in third categories of trillions, right? Which is the quadrillion, we got quadrant trillion, and we have trillions, right? So long's data type falls in third categories of trillions. So when you have these situations wherein you want to pass on long set of values, and maybe the integer cannot hold it because like integer, the maximum should be like 2 billions. Anything above 2 billions is not in the syntax of the integer data type, right? But rather, if you try to reduce this now, the screens of numbers, right now you won't have error, right? Because it is in the syntax of the 2 billions provided by the programming language. You see now you don't have error because it's in the syntax of the integer data type. At first the numbers we passed was very large, so we have that error. So these are some of the things we face at times within our coding. So guys, we move to our next tutorial. You can see the code, and if you also have questions on this tutorial, you can also comment below. But this is how to declare and pass a set of values, assign some set of values to the various data type. I show you the casting method, and I also show you the method wherein you can like use the various letters behind the data type. And thank you. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's move to our next tutorial. Okay.